Hi, I'm Claire and this is my reading wrap up for books 24 to 33 that I've read this year. Now, I started the year doing monthly wrap ups, but I haven't done one of those in a few months now because my reading was really irregular earlier this year and I got really busy. But I am catching up now and I wanted to do these 10 books, books 24 to 33 together because they were all a massive bunch of graphic novels and volumes of comic books. Now, I do read graphic novels regularly and there are some comic books that I follow that I buy every volume, but I don't usually read like a whole 10 in one go. What happened here is that I was trying to read all of the graphic novels nominated for this year's Hugo Awards, and I did manage to read all of them in the end, but that involved getting caught up with some of them and also going to the comic book store, which meant I also bought some new volumes of other comics that I follow that weren't necessarily nominated for the Hugo. Without further ado, let's get started with 2 volumes of a series that was not in fact nominated for the Hugos, but which I've discussed on this channel before and which I continue to love, and that is Giant Days. This was created and is written by John Allison and it's illustrated by Max Sarin, and I read recently volumes 3 and 4 and I really love this series. It's set in a university. We follow 3 friends who live in the same halls of residence. We've got Daisy and Esther, and the third one, Susan, isn't on either of these covers, but she is still pretty kick-ass. The art style is a little bit cartoony, a little bit kind of Disney-like, and I think it suits really well with the kind of subject matter and the kind of atmosphere of the stories that are being told. There's so much in this. There's friendships and relationships forming and breaking and changing and strengthening. There are people finding out stuff about one another that they didn't know. There's like a weird political campaign plot with a kind of a conspiracy theory at the bottom of it. There is a character who wants to quit university and then the others have to kind of convince that character to come back. There's a character from high school who comes back into the life of one of our protagonists. They have to figure out if they can still be friends now that the environment around them has changed. I personally find it very heartfelt and I will absolutely be picking up the next volume. Next is the start of my Hugo Awards graphic work reading. Now, if you have seen my last wrap up before this one, I read Monstrous Volume 1 Awakenings, which was also nominated and indeed in the meantime has won the Hugo for Best Graphic Work this year. All of the other books that were nominated I read in this period and I'm going to mention in this wrap up. I don't want to go into too much detail about them because there are so many, and also because I talked about them at greater length in my podcast Radio Free Fandom, where I did an episode all about these books, which I will link down below. But the first one that I read was Black Panther Volume 1 A Nation Under Our Feet, and that's written by Ta-Nehisi Coates and illustrated by Brian Stelfreeze. This book is obviously a Marvel comic and I very much appreciated that I could read the book without having read anything else in the Marvel continuity, which is not the case for some of the other Marvel books I'm going to talk about here. It's very dense, very politicky. It's a graphic novel that you have to concentrate to read, which I don't really have a problem with, but I think is worth noting. I quite enjoyed this. It was kind of slow for a first volume because there was so much politics in it, but at the same time I do personally love politics, so I quite liked it. I thought the art in this book was fine, although it didn't particularly stand out to me as having a very specific style. It just felt very comic booky, which is not a problem specifically, but I think compared to some of the other books that are in this wrap-up, it was just a little bit kind of eh. Next up, we've got The Vision Volume 1 Little Worse Than a Man, and that's written by Tom King and illustrated by Gabriel Hernandez Walter, and I did not like this book particularly. This is a 2-volume storyline and I will not be picking up the second part of it. The book is of course about the Vision, and in this particular storyline he wants to be a normal man and he wants to have a normal family, therefore he fabricates a family for himself, basically builds a bunch of robots to be his wife, his daughter and his son, so they can have a very normal nuclear family with a white picket fence home, and of course it all goes wrong. I just really couldn't get into this from the beginning. It opens by telling you what happens at the end, which I don't find to be a great storytelling device in many cases. I found the characters really difficult to like and to empathize with because there are so many things that don't actually make sense for me in this book. Both things that don't make sense because I haven't read certain prior Marvel comics, which means that I'm really confused about whatever it is that happened between the Vision and Wanda prior to this comic. But also, there are things that to me as a sci-fi person don't make sense in the world building of the thing, like what kind of robots are they? Like, it's just super confusing. What I really did like about this was the sense of tragic inevitability about this story, that every time the Visions tried to be just normal and boring and regular, something went wrong. And every time they tried to fix whatever was wrong, it went even worse. So I quite enjoyed that, and I quite enjoyed the kind of like the mundane turning into horror element of the book. And I would also add that the art style, I think, really serves that very well. I'm trying to find a page that is not either massively graphic or massively spoilery. You've got something like this where the high contrast between the colors, the overall darkness of the page, the fact that the color that's chosen for the Vision's kind of skin, exoskeleton, whatever you want to call it, doesn't approximate really anyone's skin color, but it's this kind of like angry, tender pink that you'd see around the wound. I found that the overall effect of the comic was really kind of uncomfortable and like low level tension, and I really didn't enjoy the reading experience because of that. I think it's at least partly effective in what it's wanting to do, but I'm not sure I like what it's wanting to do. Then we've got Paper Girls Volume 1. This is written by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Cliff Chiang, and this is a really, really beautiful, very weird book. I did not expect the type of story that I ended up getting in this book at all. I thought it was going to be a cute story about some girls on a paper round in the 80s, and it basically kind of starts that way, and after 20 pages it's like alien invasion everywhere, which wasn't bad, but was very, very strange. The illustrations in this book are absolutely gorgeous, and as you can see from the cover as well as some pages I'm going to put in now, the colors in this book are absolutely gorgeous. The colors here are done by Matt Wilson, and this palette of pastels superimposed with like monsters and werewolves are really, really striking and kind of give the story this like supernatural, almost absurdist feel where it doesn't really match up, but it just makes it better. I was a bit confused at the end of this first book what the heck was going on. This is the kind of first volume where I'm not convinced what's going on in the story at the end of it, and that would usually really bother me. However, I trust Brian K. Vaughan's writing. I'm a huge fan of Saga. I've also really enjoyed what I've read of Why the Last Man, so I kind of assume that it's going somewhere. And also, at the very end of this book, there is a cliffhanger for book 2, which I won't reveal because it's quite good when it comes up, but it is one of my favorite tropes ever, so I'm super excited to read book 2, and I have in fact already bought it, so I will be reading it relatively soon, and I cannot wait. And finally, for this wrap up, I read 5 volumes of Ms. Marvel. Now, 2 of those, the first and second volume, that is No Normal and Generation Y, were rereads for me, but the next 3 volumes, Volume 3 Crushed, Volume 4 Last Days, and Volume 5 Super Famous were all first time reads because number 5, Super Famous, was nominated for the Hugo and because I wanted to catch up anyway. Now I reread the first 2 volumes because I couldn't quite remember what happened in them. I read them when they first came out, and aside from Ms. Marvel's origin story and the fact that Wolverine shows up at some point and she takes a selfie with him, I didn't quite remember the plot line, so I wanted to reread the whole thing before I got to volume 5, Super Famous, and I did that and it was really good fun, but I have some issues with this that all stem from this being a Marvel comic that gets caught up in like broader Marvel storylines that again mean that I don't really get to experience the full story of Ms. Marvel unless I read other Marvel stuff, and I don't really want to have to do that because I am a fan of graphic works and comic books in general, but like I was also raised in a school of graphic storytelling that does not have the whole like Marvel DC crossovers whatever. Like in France, when you have a series of graphic novels, it's just that series. And if you're reading a story about character A, then you don't need to read like 3 more books about characters B, D, and W for, you know, this one character to make sense. And it really annoys me that that's not the case here. We missed like an entire year of Kamala Khan's life and stuff just happens that hardly makes sense to me. Like she doesn't notice something really huge and obvious in her best friend's life and she's, you know, supposed to really care about him. So that's weird. There are stories that are really well done within the series that I absolutely love, but I don't know if I'm going to continue with the series, and that kind of annoys me because I really like Ms. Marvel as a character. I really like the whole concept behind her, and I really like the ancillary characters that are developed alongside Kamala. I also find it fairly annoying that the art in the books kind of keeps changing. All of the books are written by G. Willow Wilson. The artist for the first volume is Adrian Alfona, and I really love his art. I just love the overall style where the lines are very thin and they're not overbearing, and the whole comic is kind of very light and colorful, and the characters' features are kind of cartoonish. They're still fairly realistic, but the expressions are just exaggerated a little bit so that they look more expressive. Like when Kamala is surprised, she goes really bug-eyed, and I just think that goes really well with the general tone of the comic. Now, Alfona illustrates some of the other books as well. Like he has some pages in Generation Y, he has some pages in Super Famous, he does actually illustrate all of Lost Days, but say Crushed is done by 2 other people, and like these 2 both have also different artists as well as Alfona, and it's not like they're bad, it's just like it doesn't look like Kamala anymore. And I realized that that is something that Marvel and DC and bigger comic houses that have a lot of titles coming out at the same time do all the time, and it's not weird for like American comic books, but again, for the way that I learned to love comics when I was a kid, it is super weird when the artist changes. So it's just not something I'm super comfortable with, which kind of sucks because it's something that happens all the time with bigger Marvel and DC titles. So, meh. In conclusion, for Ms. Marvel, I'm enjoying it now less than when I first started reading the series, and I'm not sure if I'm going to continue reading. I'm gonna have to listen to reviews and opinions from other people to see if I think it's worth my time, and in this case my money, because I've started collecting this series and I don't know that I specifically want to buy more, because one of the big reasons I want to collect graphic novels and, you know, have all these physical editions is the art. And if I'm not 100% about the story and I'm not 100% about the art, then I might want to put my Ms. Marvel budget towards other graphic novels, which would make me sad, but might have to do it. So that's it. These were 10 graphic novels I read earlier this year. I will be back with another wrap-up video for the next, I think, 6 books that I read this year, and then I will try and go back to a monthly schedule of wrap-ups from September onwards. In the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you've been reading any of these comic books. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check a recent video right about here. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face right about here for more videos from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.